All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to do a little comparison discussion between shotguns and bolt-action rifles. Now, long-time viewers of the channel know that I've been doing a lot of comparisons between shotguns and other weapons platforms. So if you're interested in those videos, go ahead and check out the links in the description. Today we're going to be looking at pump-action shotguns versus bolt-action rifles. Now, the question might be, Murph, who is this video kind of aimed at? Is this aimed at the hunter? No, I would say not. Specifically because a hunter is going to be able to pretty quickly evaluate what their requirements. There's a lot of other things that drive a hunter's requirements. So if you were, say, trying to do a one-size-fits-all solution, a shotgun would have a lot of flexibility for you, depending on what it is that you were trying to do. So if you're trying to hunt waterfowl and then use that same gun to buy relatively inexpensive ammunition or to be able to hunt big game, sure, that works out, as long as you're trying to hunt that big game within 100 yards or so. Now, if you're in a position where you might have to take longer pokes at game animals, then a shotgun's not necessarily going to work out for you. You're going to need to switch to a rifle. If you live in a locality that doesn't allow you to have rifle cartridges to hunt, then, I mean, the answer is pretty obvious at that point. You're going to have to hunt with a shotgun. Now, there's other options in this case because most of those places that only allow you to hunt with shotgun shells or with slugs, specifically when it comes to big game, have now adjusted their rules to be able to allow you to hunt with straight-walled cartridges. So most will top out at like 4570 or 4590 whenever it comes to that type of loading, but you can still get, rifle cartridges at that point. Excuse me, guys, I'm getting over a cold. Doing a lot better than I was earlier this week, but still kind of lingering there. As opposed to, if you're looking to mostly hunt any type of, fowl and or upland game, a rifle's probably not going to apply, especially if it comes to bird hunting. Most states don't let you hunt with a rifle at things that fly in the air because bullets have to eventually come back down, and that's a problem. In addition to it being relatively difficult to, hit moving targets in the air with a rifle. It's kind of why shotguns exist to begin with. Now, if you're looking at only hunting at greater distances, you need a lot more energy to be able to operate at those distances. Yes, rifles are going to be more credible to you at this point. So it's not the hunter. Well, what about like the sports shooter? Well, again, I think the sports shooter is going to pretty well know whether or not a rifle or a shotgun meets their purposes. If they are shooting skeet, then they're probably not bringing a rifle out. If they're shooting PRS, they're probably not bringing a shotgun out. Probably not going to work out very well for them in the long term. This is more focused towards fighting rifle setups, or fighting long gun setups, I guess I should say. Well, Murph, why are bolt action rifles even in this chat right now? The obvious answer is some sort of semi-automatic platform, and you're 100% right, in places that allow you to do so. For those living behind enemy lines in locations that don't allow them access to those type of modern sporting rifles, this discussion is incredibly credible to them. Now, in addition to that, of course, at this point, somebody might be saying like, well, then obviously we're going to be talking about the scout rifle. Sort of. For those of you who don't know, the scout rifle was a concept developed by Colonel Jeff Cooper in which you took a bolt-action rifle with a full-power rifle cartridge and in more modern iterations, a detachable box magazine, and combined that with a scout-type scope setup, which was to have a long eye relief, low-power variable optic set far ahead of the ejection. Commonly we would see scopes mounted above the ejection port. This is going to be located out further along the handguard. And this was Colonel Jeff Cooper's like end-all be-all for a fighting type rifle setup. Now, that's kind of crazy talk in my opinion, because at the time that he developed this, the SP1 existed. And like why you would not want an AR-15 is... I'm obviously showing my age. At the time period, the AR-15 was not as widely accepted as things like bolt-action rifles or M1 carbines, anything along those types of lines. Even so, the M1 carbine existed. That'd be a better overall option. Colonel Jeff Cooper is looking more like an end-of-the-world type option, something that you could hunt and fight with. And I get that, though, whether or not many of the things that Colonel Jeff Cooper had to say aged very well was a conversation for a different time, a Murph hot take, if you will. So we're not necessarily focusing on the scout rifle. We're just focusing on bolt-action rifles in general. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get into the pros and cons between these two systems. A pump action shotgun is widely regarded as being highly versatile. You can run birdshot, buckshot, slugs, specialty rounds, all that kind of stuff through it. And I've discussed this quite a bit in the past as far as like that lacks a lot of context, because what is the situation that's requiring me to be able to fluidly move across these types of ammunition? Like progressive loading and all that kind of stuff, in my opinion, is not an effective means in order to be able to conduct self-defense type engagements, blah, 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 blah. I think an important thing to note, guys, is that I have a relatively extensive firearms collection and I intend to continue to grow it. Like, I don't really sell guns, and if I sell guns, it's in order to be able to immediately replace that gun. It's a one-for-one swap. So not everyone's like that. And as much as it would be a lot cooler if y'all were, some people are looking for something that they can go shoot at ducks with and then use as their home defense gun or potentially their life and liberty gun. I get that. That's completely fine. To each their own. It's probably more financially savvy as well. But there's probably something else you blow your money on. Don't lie. So, with that being the case, I think the versatility of the shotgun can be overhyped in many of these ways. Just like the reliability of a pump action shotgun. A lot of people will sit there and say, oh, well, they're just so simple, they never fail, all those types of things. Well, that same thing can be leveraged at a bolt action rifle. One of the important things to note is that this is where we get into simple complexity, which is a term that I use on the channel to capture the idea that though simple systems may not break down as often, any mechanical system will break down eventually. And a lot of times when shotguns fail big. Whenever it is that you're talking about like a tubular fed magazine and all those types of things. So say a lot of malfunctions in shotguns will wind up being user-induced. However, a user-induced failure is still a failure. It doesn't really matter what the core cause is here. So I have had many malfunctions in pump action shotguns over the years. A common one that I sometimes run into is kind of a case of short shucking, to where I might potentially have a cartridge casing that is somewhat protruding out of the magazine tube and it's causing the system to not be able to function appropriately. I can't really reach my hands down through the ejection port to get to that tube to be able to put that round back in there so I can get the gun back up and functioning. I have to use some type of tool. If you have to use some type of tool in order to correct a malfunction, you have a critical malfunction. That is a deadline of the weapon system at that point, if you were in a fight. That would be grounds for like, I have to ditch this thing for a little bit and go to like a sidearm or something along those lines. It is getting deep into remedial action. There's not an immediate action in order to be able to fix that. So it's not even like I get to cover and then I quickly just like clear the spent cartridge casing and now I'm back into the fight. This is, I need a dedicated tool and time to be able to employ it. Bolt action rifles can also jam. However, with their more open design, it's easier to be able to get in there and diagnose the problem and get a more effective remedial action achieved. Now, of course, range is the thing that we've already beaten up. We're not going to talk about that too much more. But what about loading? So it depends on what type of shotgun and or bolt action rifle it is that you're talking about. We on the channel primarily talk about tubular magazine fed shotguns because I do not care for magazine fed shotguns for two reasons. One, rimmed cartridge casings do not adapt themselves very well to magazines. Specifically stacked magazines. They were designed more with like single shots and or tubular magazines in mind, not necessarily box magazines. And then number two, when you take a plastic shotgun shell, put it under spring tension and press it against the feed lips of a magazine, you could wind up deforming that cartridge, which is going to induce malfunctions. So it's not a long-term storage option either, which makes that potentially problematic because does your gun spend more time loaded waiting to be used or actively fighting? If you're trying to use this for a defensive type purpose, it's going to spend more time loaded waiting for use. So you're going to cycle that ammunition out more frequently. Bolt action rifles, things get a little more finicky. If you have a fixed magazine, yes, it's going to be slower to reload. And of course, between both of these guns, capacity is going to be low because even in a detachable box magazine and a shotgun shells are space intensive items. You don't get a lot of capacity. Like a large detachable box magazine is like a drum for 10 rounds of 12 gauge. It's not a lot for the amount of space that it takes up. If you start to get into like your hunting rifles with small capacity detachable box magazines, those magazines are kind of expensive and they're not necessarily designed for like extensive combat use. So that's not necessarily a positive association, though it is faster than trying to individually stuff rounds into a tubular magazine. And then from there, of course, you have your larger capacity detachable box magazines, your AICS, or even AR-15 magazines if it is legal in your state to possess them. At that point, you have capacity and you have fast mag changes involved. These are very clear advantages over a shotgun. Even with a shotgun, we have developed faster ways to be able to feed tubular magazine shotguns in the form of quad and double loading. However, there's a couple things you have to take into account whenever it is that you talk about double and quad loading, and that is that first off, you need the shells oriented properly. Now, there are pouches that are built that allow you to be able to strip those shells. They're oriented in the direction that you need them to be, and then you can feed them into that magazine very quickly and easily. Most people run shotgun shells and shell loops of some sort, so then you'd have to fish both rounds out of the shell loop, or however many rounds out of the shell loops, orient them in your hand, and then feed them. That's not faster. It's actually adding more steps. You might as well just single stuff at that point. In addition to that, your shotgun has to be conducive to that type of feeding. You probably need some aftermarket modification to the gun in order to be able to make that type of feeding system smooth. I've played with it on my shotguns before, and I can do it. However, I would really benefit from having like a ramp or something like that installed or milled in order to be able to more smoothly feed those rounds. You have less of that as an issue with bolt action rifles, but we will talk about that more once we get into the shooting portion coming up here in a minute. All right, guys, that's our pros and cons. Why don't we go ahead and introduce the players before we get into the range portion of this particular video. So to represent our pump action shotguns, we have this Mossberg 500, chambered in 12 gauge, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. And then for the bolt action rifles, we have this Mosin Nagant WZ-44, chambered in 7.62 by 5.4. Also previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. All right, let's go ahead and start talking about how it is that I conducted the range thing. Now, longtime viewers of these videos will know that I do not do the same drill for every one of these comparison videos. I'm not trying to create like some sort of test or some sort of like comprehensive body of knowledge. This is mostly for conversation's sake and entertainment. Like if this sparks some stuff, I bring in some data in order to be able to spark a deeper conversation, but I'm not necessarily trying to give you like a comprehensive answer, just more what formulates my worldview, if you will. So I change up the drills every time because this is also my opportunity to train. Pretty much everything I do for the channel now. All shooting footage is in some way connected to the channel, be it the Murph's Law Facebook page, if you're interested in that, link in the description, or just here on YouTube. And my Instagram for my own use. It's not really connected to the channel. So, what I selected for the drills, because I always do 3 drills, was just a simple 5-round engagement starting from low ready at 5, 10, and 15 yards. So, why don't we go ahead and roll into the first bit of shooting footage. All right, guys, now it's important to note that first off, I'm shooting steel with the shotgun and paper with the rifle. Why is that? Well, because if I shoot paper with my shotgun, I'm going to destroy my paper. And if I shoot steel with my rifle, I'm going to destroy that steel very quickly. I don't shoot steel at close ranges with a rifle. I don't shoot steel inside of 50 yards with a rifle. I already have a bullet in me. I don't want another one. And I've had a lot of friends that have gotten messed up shooting steel too close with large caliber rifle rounds. Now, the shells that I'm running through the Mossberg 500 are 7.5 birdshot target loads, and the Mosin Nagant is having some old Bulgarian light armor piercing rounds shot out of it, so I definitely don't want those shot at my steel. Now, something that kind of establishes a trend early on, and I ran the numbers down at the bottom of the shooting footage, something that establishes a trend early on is that the shotgun is moving roughly 2 seconds faster than the bolt action rifle. And that's not a surprise because for the shotgun cycling, all I have to do is bring it back and bring it forward. Whereas with the bolt action, I have to rotate, pull back, push forward, rotate down. And though I can do this very smoothly, it's still more time than just a simple back and forth. We're not really going to be able to get away from that in this case. Steel impacts are graded by whether or not I swing the steel, because that tells me that I got enough shot on target in order to be able to grade that as a hit. It's going to play a bigger part as we move forward. All right, so then I moved back to 10 yards and I repeated my shot string. Let's go ahead and check out that footage. All right, guys, so once again, shotgun stacking effective enough hits and doing so slightly faster than the Mosin Nagant, especially since I did have a malfunction with this Mosin Nagant. Now, what's really interesting is that it looked like a case of rim lock, and I was very confused by this for a couple of reasons. First off, the Mosin Nagant is supposed to have an interrupter in the magazine that diminishes the possibility of having an issue with rim lock. What is rim lock? Rim lock is when you have rimmed cartridge casings and one cartridge case gets behind another cartridge case, so that when you try to feed it into the chamber, it's getting hung up and stops the bolt from moving forward and actually feeding the round into the chamber. I try to be very diligent with how it is that I load a magazine on a Mosin Nagant to make sure that I stack the cartridge case, the cartridge rims going forward. So I was very surprised when I had that significant of a malfunction with this particular rifle. So we can definitely say in this case that the Mosin Nagant lost on time. And the shotgun was still performing effectively at 15 yards. I think I gave you guys the wrong distances earlier. 10, 15, and 20 yards is what it was supposed to be. I apologize if I messed that up. So the second engagement was at 15. Now we're going back to 20 yards. Let's go ahead and see how that went. All right, guys, now we can really start to see that though I could grade hits on the steel, they were not nearly as significant movements as when we started at 10 yards. At 20 yards, we're definitely losing some gas. Now, Murph, you're shooting 7.5 target loads at it. Like, what do you expect, man? Yes, that is in fact the case, and I understand what it is that you would be saying there at this time. And of course, in a real gunfight, I hopefully wouldn't be shooting birdshot at anybody. Like, hopefully I brought buck and or slugs. But it's an important conversation whenever it is that we talk about shotguns, because we need to keep in mind patterning. This is an improved cylinder bore. I need to make sure that I pair this shotgun with a load that it likes, and I need to know how that load performs at distance, so that as I'm going through an engagement, as if this is my fighting option, if this is what I'm going to defend myself at the world ends or something along those lines, I need to know how far I can accurately pattern a shot of buckshot. Generally, you're looking at 30, maybe 35 yards, something along those lines, before you're going to have too wide of a pattern to be able to effectively use buckshot. And you need to be able to know what that distance is for your gun and load combination so that you know when to throw in a slug. Or say you're engaging somebody who's utilizing cover and you don't think you can actually get enough of your pattern on them whenever they expose themselves from cover in order to be able to effectively end the fight. So now at this point, you know you need to switch over to a slug. So that was one of the things that I wanted to get after in this case with this comparison, was kind of seeing if in those engagement distances I lost enough of my shot pattern to be able to not effectively grade impacts on the steel. And in this case, I could still do it, but we were definitely flirting with the edge of what we could do. So this also might be a situation where, this Mossberg does not have interchangeable choke tubes. If you had a gun that did have interchangeable choke tubes, you would be able to say like, oh, if I go up to a modified choke tube, perhaps I can extend my engagement distance with my buck a little bit better. However, how is that going to impact my slug. Those are things that you have to take into account for this conversation. Now, we will also note that I had 2-click no bangs with this Mosin Nagant. Now, what you guys may not have necessarily noticed all throughout the shooting footage is that actually I was having some interesting ammunition problems the entire time. Not just the malfunctions, but also there were many times where I would pull this trigger, I would hear the firing pin go home, and then it would be half a heartbeat before the round actually went. So, shooting military surplus ammunition, we're definitely getting to a point where a lot of the military surplus that some of you have stockpiled and all those types of things is not holding up in the way that it needs to. I've had this happen with quite a bit of military surplus ammunition in the last couple of years, primarily in 7.62x5.4 and 8mm Mauser. So some things to take into account there. Probably want to do some lot testing on any stockpiled surplus ammunition you have. So I had 2 rounds in a row with dead primers. And you guys could see in the footage, I even recocked the rifle. I didn't fully cycle it, just cocked it in order to be able to attempt a second strike. And that became a third strike before I finally ejected that round. I didn't even mess around with it on the second one. So that was a massive time difference. I decided to go ahead and run that drill with the last 5 rounds that I had. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Once again, the shotgun was slightly faster. I was still able to stack hits, and I'm not necessarily worried about my ability to stack hits at 20 yards with a rifle. All right, Murph. Okay, we see that you kind of got after testing the range in which you would effectively be able to engage with a shotgun. Why didn't you do reloads? You kind of played to the shotgun's strength in this case, and you kind of diminished the rifle's options, especially since I have stripper clips for this. So I have a fast manner in order to be able to reload this gun. Well, because ultimately it's not going to, doing that is not necessarily going to change the outcome. I have examples of putting shotguns up against guns that reload more efficiently. I think we all understand that shotguns are not terribly efficient reloading options. So I don't feel like it was something that I had to necessarily demonstrate as much as I wanted to go ahead and test the distance that I would effectively be able to grade hits with this shotgun. And really, I pulled interesting data from that for my own conclusions as it is. All right then, Murph. What are your conclusions and or recommendations in this case between these 2 weapon systems? Well, guys, I think my bias towards rifles is well known. I have spent my entire adult life training around rifles. I'm very comfortable with rifles. I know how to accessorize rifles and set them up and all that kind of stuff. Not to say that I don't know how to run, accessorize, and use shotguns. I absolutely do. But I am comfortable fighting close range and long range with a rifle. And I don't have those same capabilities represented in a shotgun. That is where the trade-offs of reload and capacity and all that kind of stuff really put the shotgun on the back foot for me whenever it is that I'm assessing the viability of a defensive arm. Now, is the Mosin Nagant necessarily going to be my go-to option if I was living in a state that didn't allow me to own an AR-15? Probably not. I would probably look more towards a scout rifle type setup, perhaps a touch more modernized. Something that I could get detachable box magazines, probably go with an intermediate cartridge, depending, and then also be able to set it up with lights and more modern optics and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to maximize my capabilities with that setup. So, though the Mosin Nagant maybe didn't necessarily give us the best showing out on the range, it doesn't change my outcomes nor my opinions. As far as I would still rather fight with a rifle than a shotgun if I have the opportunity. Now, if you picked a shotgun, does that mean that you're wrong? If you decided that you wanted to go with the shotgun because of the versatility and all that kind of stuff over the bolt action rifle, does that mean that you're wrong and I hate you? No, not at all. But you do need to get out there and practice with it and understand your engagement distances and also get the gun accessorized appropriately in order to be able to take the best advantage of those engagement distances. So if you're expecting a shotgun might have to be your standoff weapon and you might have a gun set up to be just that, get an optic on it. Get a low power scope on it or something along those lines. And then also have a shotgun available to you that has a red dot or something like that on it. The only thing the scope really in this case is going to give you is better association with PID. Like a red dot, in my opinion, is still the best option for a shotgun, but that's just my opinion. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.